Welcome to the Newsome MMA podcast, partnered with Heavy Duty Fight Management. I'm your host as always, Newsome, with your co-host Jon, and tonight we're going to be breaking down UFC on ESPN Plus 9 from Ottawa, Ontario in Canada. Jon, how are you doing tonight, man?
How you doing? I'm very good, thank you. I'm intrigued to see how this card's going to go down because, as the listeners probably know, we're never the kind of people to shit on cards or anything. But on paper, this isn't the strongest of cards, but we've seen so many times how the fights can still deliver. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes down.
Yeah, I'm the same, man, and it's funny because I'm pretty sure anybody will be able to quote us both at some point saying that we never shit on cards before we see the fights. But yeah, I've got a similar feeling as well. You know, it doesn't seem to be the greatest of cards on paper, but you know, as I always say time and time again, it's normally those sort of cards that just turn out to be absolutely fire. So hopefully it's the case again here. But
definitely.
Before we start, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of the supporters of the show, along with your kind words each week too. It really does mean a lot to us. Please make sure you subscribe to our podcast platforms across YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and now iTunes too, to make sure that you never miss an episode of the podcast, especially with YouTube as well, because we've also got MMA media content on there as well, which includes pre-fight and post-fight interviews. And Newsome MMA has been granted media credentials for Bellator Birmingham this weekend too. So make sure you subscribe to the channel again to make sure you don't miss any of the content. But with that said, let's break down some fights at UFC Ottawa, and we enter the Showtime Fights. The first Showtime fight tonight is the co-main event. We've got Derek Brunson versus Elias Theodorou. Jon, who have you got?
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting fight. I think when this card was announced, this was rumoured to be the main event, and there's a lot of talk this was going to headline the card, and I think the fans in Ottawa will be somewhat glad that this isn't headlining. They've got some slightly bigger names. No offense to Brunson or Elias Theodorou, but yeah, it's tough to really gauge how this is going to play out because Brunson is one of those real up and down fighters. I mean, he's 35 years old now. He's on a 2-fight losing skid. Is he starting to be on that decline that we talk about so often? I think quite possibly yes, but then you look at the last two guys that he's fought, and it's Jacare Souza and Israel Adesanya, who's now the interim champion. So it is kind of hard to gauge. And before that, he had 2 wins to his name against Lyoto Machida, Dan Kelly. Obviously, Machida is not the guy that he was 10 years ago, and then obviously he's got that Anderson Silva loss, which should have been a win. We've talked about that before, and then he's got the Robert Whittaker loss before that. So it's kind of hard to gauge where Derek Brunson is. I think we know a lot more of what we'll get with Elias Theodorou. He specialises in he's a very good points fighter, and let's be honest, the chances are that if a fight involves Theodorou, it's going to go to a decision. And he plays to his strengths really well. He backs off and fires off those kicks when he can. When his back's against the cage, he angles off nicely, lands a few counter shots, and rinse and repeat. And he ends up quite often in very, very close contests, but he always seems to edge them because he does catch people when they come in. We saw that in his last fight against Eric Anders. Now, I bet Anders in that fight, and I thought it was an extremely close decision. But I do think the judges got that one right, and Theodorou was landing shots when Anders was charging forward, and the key to defeating Elias Theodorou is he's cutting off those angles, because when he does back up against the fence, he angles off really well and makes that space to, like I say, just repeat the process of catching you when you're coming in, kicking you with those body kicks and those leg kicks from the outside, and then as you close the distance, he'll back up, try and catch you with counter shots as you come in, and then he'll angle off again. So be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see if Derek Brunson turns to his wrestling when Theodorou's back's against the fence and tries to grapple him, grind him, wear on him, because striking, he does possess power, but I don't know whether he quite has the technique in his footwork to cut Theodorou off and cut off the cage and give him no escape. But like I say, if he does land shots on you. He can put guys away, and we've seen that. We saw that in the Machida fight. We saw that in the Dan Kelly fight. We saw that in the Uriah Hall, Rowan Carnero fight, Sam Alvey. All of these are first round finishes. Ed Herman. I mean, the list can go on, and like I say, if he does connect, and if he can connect on you, he can put you away. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But for me, I think we're going to see another Elias Theodorou points masterclass in this fight. I think he's like I say, he's just going to utilise his strengths, and that's counter striking. That's backing up, picking his shots when Brunson marches forward, and if he could stuff those takedowns, Brunson. We saw in his last fight against Adesanya, he was very quick to try and engage in those takedowns, and he wasn't setting them up at all. And if he gets frustrated with Theodorou not being able to land on him, Theodorou always been out of range, out of distance, angling off, and he just tries to shoot for the takedowns naked without setting them up. I think Theodorou will be able to stuff them as well, and keep the fight standing, and just work his points game. So for that reason, I'm going with Elias Theodorou to win this fight via decision.
Yeah, I mean, for me, first and foremost, it's refreshing to hear you, John, saying that you had a bet on a fight. I've not heard that before, so I'm proud of you, man. But listen, coming on to the fight itself, it's an interesting fight, because you've hit a lot of good points. We all know what we're going to get from both guys, to be honest. Derek Brunson is an aggressive pressure striker that does fall back on his wrestling as a plan B. He'll come forward recklessly, throwing bombs. He's got power, 11 knockouts out of 18 wins. It's not to be snuffed at all. And then even when you look at Derek Brunson's losses, Israel Adesanya, Jacare, Anderson Silva, which is a fight that he won, by the way, Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero, the dude only loses to the top of the division, which isn't Elias Theodorou. Now, I'm not gonna sit, because a lot of people shit on Elias Theodorou, and I'm not gonna be one of those people. I actually like the guy. Is he exciting to watch? Not particularly. Does he win you a lot of money long term? Absolutely. So you can see the reason why I like the dude. He's a points fighter, and he knows how to win fights. That's what he does. But I think stylistically, this fight favours Derek Brunson, because Brunson tends to lose a lot of his fights by being aggressive and going in there with his chin out and getting cracked by the top of the division, right? But Elias hasn't got the power of Israel Adesanya. He hasn't got the power of Jacare. He hasn't got the power of Robert Whittaker. He hasn't got the power of Yoel Romero. So I actually think that if Brunson hasn't fixed the obvious defensive holes in his striking, that he could go back to, or stick with, his normal reckless striking style, and actually really try and put it on Elias. Because I'm not saying that Elias can't knock him out, because these are MMA fighters with 4-ounce gloves on, but what I'm trying to say is Brunson isn't going to get hit as hard in this fight as he has done in all his previous knockout losses. So he has the opportunity in this fight to go forward a little bit recklessly and have a little bit of insurance that he probably isn't going to get knocked out. Now, when you move slightly away from that and you look at how he's preparing for this fight, I found it very interesting to what I actually found out about Brunson. So for years now, Derek Brunson's been doing the Greg Jackson split with his own home gym combination. The reason why he split with the home gym is because he wanted to still be with it around his family. He didn't want to miss out on time with them and things like that. I totally get that. It must be a difficult lifestyle for a fighter. And then especially as of late with Greg Jackson, I think they are turning a corner, but we all know that gym was going through a few problems with people leaving and egos and arguments and stuff like that inside camp. I mean, we don't know all the ins and outs. We're only going off what we hear sort of on the grapevine, but I think that combination was actually really bad for Brunson. But what he's done this time is decided to stop that split between Greg Jackson and his home gym, and he's actually gone over to Henry Hoof at Hard Knocks 365, and I feel that if anybody can tighten Brunson's striking defense up, along with utilizing his power is still utilising his power in his striking, I think that's going to be Henry Hooft. Brunson's also got a lot of great fighters to work around, both strikers and wrestlers as well. So he's got a lot of world-class bodies in that gym. And when you look at, and I know he's 35, but when you look at where he's at now, full time at somewhere like Henry Hooft, world class training partners across the board in all disciplines of mixed martial arts, I actually think we're going to see a much more improved Derek Brunson. Now, the key to victory for Brunson in this fight is he has to stay patient, because I feel that this first round with Elias could potentially get him frustrated and bring that recklessness side out of him. Because Elias, we all know what we get with him. He starts off moving really well. He's constantly moving side to side, backwards, exiting when his back's getting pushed against the cage, using angles really well. You've just touched upon this as well, John. So his movement's really good, particularly in that first round, and that's where he steals around, and his opponent really needs poise at that point to make sure that they're not going to start losing their head. They're not going to overexert themselves. They are going to remain calm and patient and just understand that this is how Elias Theodorou fights. If Brunson can remain patient, because I think he's going to drop round one, if he can remain patient and just pick his shots and just use his head inside the cage and just know that it's a 3-round fight, not a 1-round fight, I think that he can then start taking over from the second round. And before the Eric Anders fight, I'd be saying I think Derek Brunson would win a decision, because I absolutely think that that he's capable of winning on points, even though it is Elias is a point scoring master and we're in his home country as well. I do think that it's possible for Brunson to win a decision. But after that Eric Anders fight, we saw that Theodorou can be got at. We saw that he can be dropped. We saw that he can be hurt. And I feel that if that was Brunson instead of Anders inside the cage at that point, I think Brunson would have finished him. I think that he's got that better killer instinct than Eric Anders has. No disrespect to Anders. Obviously, we know that he's a good fighter and he hits hard. But Brunson, we saw that with Machida. Brunson knew that he hurt Machida the second that his fist touched his chin, and he was all over that. Did not give Machida any chance to recover. And I feel that if that was Brunson in the spot that Eric Anders was in, he would have finished Theodorou in that spot. Now, you look at Theodorou's 2 losses as well, Brad Tavares, Thiago Santos. Now, I honestly believe the reason why Brad Tavares beat Elias is because he could stuff the takedowns and use his own wrestling as well against Theodorou, because Theodorou has got an underrated wrestling game in my opinion, and he is able to keep fighters on the mat once they're down, or just do that enough to win again, to score points on the judges' scorecards. But he couldn't do that against Brad Tavares. He was that little bit bigger, he was that little bit stronger, he had the wrestling to match Theodorou, and just stylistically it wasn't a great fight for him. Then you look at Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos had power, so Elias Theodorou had to be really careful of getting hit with that power. Thiago Santos is aggressive as well, so he was constantly pushing forward. He was constantly making Elias work on the back foot, which ultimately will slow you down. You just got to look at how much Zabit Magomedsharipov slowed down against Jeremy Stephens in that respect. So the points I'm trying to make is Thiago Santos had power and aggression, which ultimately beat Theodorou. Brunson has power and is aggressive. And then from Brad Tavares' side, he had the wrestling both offensively and defensively to stop that side of Elias's game. And Brunson, we know, is a legit wrestler, so he has that offensive wrestling and defensive wrestling as well, 100% takedown defense. So he's got that side to nullify Elias. So this is what I mean. I just feel that stylistically, Brunson has got the advantages in this fight. Even if he goes back to his old reckless self, and he hasn't really tightened anything up at Hard Knocks, but I really do believe he will have tightened stuff up under Henry Hooft. I really think that he's going to look a more improved fighter in this fight, and I'm taking Derek Brunson to win, and I'm going to take him to win by knockout. Now, in the next Showtime fight, we've got Brad Katona versus Merab Dvalishvili. John, who have you got?
Yeah, again, another really interesting fight, and a fight I'm really looking forward to see, because these two guys, they just put on a pace, man. So I can see this being high tempo for the entirety of the fight. Brad Katona, obviously, we know, came through The Ultimate Fighter, season 27, and he was victorious in The Ultimate Fighter. And for me, when I was watching the tape of Katona, he just looks like he's just a good mixed martial artist. He's just everywhere, just all round. He doesn't really specialise in striking over his wrestling, his grappling, or anything like that. He's just solid all round. He's really evened out his game to be a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. But he's going up against a guy, I'm going to call him Merab, because my pronunciations are terrible. So
yeah, same.
We'll keep it with Merab, first name basis. Yeah, he's coming up against a guy who is literally relentless, and he will constantly look for that takedown. He'll constantly be in your face, pressuring you. His striking is getting better. Obviously, he trains at Sarah Longo in Long Island, and they've got a good team there. They've got some very good talent coming out there, and he's a dangerous guy. And I know his UFC record to date doesn't really represent how dangerous he is. Obviously, he lost to Ricky Simone in acrimonious circumstances at the very end of the fight, like almost after the fight had finished. The ref called it from that guillotine choke. And yeah, I think we saw in his last fight against Cerrone where how dominant he can be, especially with his wrestle heavy game, and he's got that old school ground and pound style as well. He'll punch, pass, try and get into to side control, and rain down the shots, try and get into mount wherever he can. He did. I think he set a record. I can't remember if it was in the Frankie Saenz fight or the Ricky Simone fight. I think it was the Simone fight. He set a record for the number of takedowns in a bantamweight clash with 11, which tells me that he's got very good takedowns, but maybe his top game isn't as strong as it could be. Obviously, if he's keeping those guys down there, they're not popping back up, and he doesn't need to take them back down. But yeah, I think Katona's going to be in for a bit of a tough night here. I am going with Merab to get this win. I think that as we saw in the last fight against Matthew Lopez, Katona did get taken down. Especially in the first round, Lopez timed a very, very nice takedown, but it was right at the end of the round. We don't know how long he would have had that top control for, how easily Katona would have got back to his feet. Brad Katona obviously did end up winning that fight. But I think if Dvalishvili can really get in his face, and if he can keep landing those takedowns, I mean, even when you pop back up, they score points on the judges' scorecards, and I think he will be able to take Katona down because he's so relentless. He has got that kind of Khabib Nurmagomedov gas tank where he can just grapple for the entirety of 15 minutes, and he doesn't really seem to slow down at all. And if Katona can defend the takedowns, then I think it's going to be a long night for Dvalishvili, but I don't think he will be able to. I think eventually he will get taken down. I think he'll get taken down several times in each round, which will ultimately lead to him losing a decision. But saying that, this is going to be a close fight. I think he's going to be a real case of, if Katona defends those first 2 or 3 takedowns and it stays standing, I think Katona is the better striker. He's got a nice range of leg kicks. He rips it to the body nicely. He's the better striker out of the two. But I'm relying on Merab to get those takedowns, and I think they'll score impressively in the judges' eyes. So I think he'll get the decision win.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Katona is definitely the better striker in this fight. You know, I'm pretty sure he comes from an amateur boxing background. Definitely the better hands on Katona, more crisp. The movement's a little bit better on the feet in regards to the striking. But let's not get Merab's record twisted. He's 8-4. That doesn't even paint the entire picture, not one little bit, because the Ricky Simone fight was very, very controversial in regards to the late stoppage, should we call it, even though it wasn't a stoppage. I'm sort of on the fence about that, by the way. I rewatched it and I get both sides, but Merab was up. And you look, it's actually ironic because you go back to Katona's last fight against Matthew Lopez, and I think that's more of a case for the exact same stoppage, because he had Lopez in a choke at the end of the fight, and Lopez couldn't even get back up to his feet. Now, Merab did want to get back up to his feet, but he was being held down by Dot. It was just a weird scenario. I don't really need to go over that, but that was a fight where Merab was winning, and Ricky Simone is absolutely no joke. He's a legit guy himself, legit wrestling, good pressure, good cardio, and Merab beat him over 3 rounds technically. And then you go back to the Frankie Saenz fight. In my opinion, I don't use this word a lot, but in my opinion, that was a robbery. Merab should have absolutely won that fight. And then the loss before that, you're going all the way back to 2014, and it's Ricky Bandenejas, who we all know is a legit dude from Bellator now, and his only latest loss is Juan Archuleta, who is a beast wrestler. So, don't get Merab's record twisted. 8-4, it doesn't speak volumes at all, but he is a beast. The pace, the pressure that he can put on from start to finish is incredible. I put something out on Twitter about it, and there were people firing names off of me of other good fighters that put on a pace, but honestly, I still believe that there isn't many fighters, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, that starts at the same speed at the end. So there's a lot of fighters that can put a pace on over 15 minutes, 25 minutes, but there's not many that can put the exact same speed and pace from the first minute to the last minute. And Merab's one of them dudes, and just for that reason alone, he's going to cause a lot of fighters problems. Now, Katona's no slouch, so when Merab's coming forward and really putting the pressure on, he will be fighting on the back foot. And as a with the boxing background that he's got, I believe that he will be able to fight backwards as well as going forward. So again, that's going to be advantageous to him in this fight, because Merab is not going to stop pushing forward. The problem is Merab he's a big dude for bantamweight. He does cut a lot of weight. He put something on, I think it was his Instagram the other day, of how much he weighs. I think he was weighing like 160 a couple of weeks out from the fight. So the dude's huge for a bantamweight, and the fact that he's huge and he's got the power and the pace, the pressure and the cardio to go with it, is going to be a huge problem for a lot of fighters. And even his takedowns are explosive. The blast doubles, or if you don't get the double, he'll grab onto the single and he'll throw you, even if it puts him in a slightly bad position to start with. Is a good scrambler. He's at Serra Longo, as you've already mentioned, John, so he's with some extremely good grapplers, extremely good training partners, extremely good wrestlers, and he's only improving himself. I mean, he says he's 28, which a lot of people dispute, but we'll go with him being 28. He's still got room for development as well, so I still expect him to be getting better each time out. And I honestly think that in regards to the striking, if Katona really starts staying in the pocket and not stuffing the takedowns, but just making Merab work in close quarters, Merab's got good burst combinations with power, body to the head as well. And I just feel that even though Katona's the better striker, I think that the aggression and the burst striking of Merab is going to be enough to put Katona off a little bit. And then you add the wrestling and the potential takedowns that are going to be coming from Merab, because he is going to be launching himself at the doubles and the singles all night long. It does make you wonder, is Katona going to end up being a little gun shy as the fight goes late, just because he's getting a pace put on him that's so furious, and he's got takedowns coming at him left, right and centre, that he just feels that he can't overcommit to any strikes. We see it time and time again with pressure wrestlers, that their opponent ends up becoming a little bit gun shy, even if striking is their forte and their path to victory, just because they're just getting taken down every time they throw a strike. And I can honestly see it being one of those types of fights. I like Katona. I think he's got a good all round game. Again, specifically his striking's clean and crisp, but I don't see him winning this fight. And I've got Merab Dvalishvili to win the fight, and I'm going to take him to win by decision. Now, in the last Showtime fight, we've got the two young heavyweights, Arjan Bhullar versus Juan Adams. John, who have you got?
Yeah, this I'm starting to sound like a broken record now with me keep saying these fights are interesting, but again, this really is an interesting fight that I really feel could go either way. Obviously, we've got Arjan Bhullar who's coming into the fight off the back of that win over Marcelo Golm. Obviously, Golm was fighting. Was it last week, the week before? I think it was the week before, wasn't it? In Russia. We spoke about Golm. I don't rate him particularly highly. He made Bhullar, who's obviously we know is a Olympic freestyle wrestler. He made Bhullar like a bit of a whiz on the feet as well, which isn't really his specialty. Although his striking is decent and it's getting better. And he's going up against a guy who's just a beast. He's just massive. He's just 6'5", huge heavyweight. Comes in at the heavyweight limit all the time. Big reach. He's got knockout power. All of his fights have finished via strikes. 4 first-round finishes, and then we saw in his last fight against De La Rocha that he can translate that power into the third round. And I think against a lot of other human beings, that fight would have ended sooner because De La Rocha was getting lit up. He was getting hit with some heavy shots. He's just got a rock hard head. I mean, it took everything for Adams to put him away, and eventually he did with that big knee in the third round and the follow-up strikes. But it's going to be interesting to see what game plan they both go in here with, because I think Bhullar will want to utilise his wrestling. I don't think he'll want to stand up and test out the striking of Juan Adams, because I think he will lose that quite convincingly. We've yet to really see. We saw Adams get some takedowns of his own against De La Rocha in his last fight, especially those trip takedowns on the clinch, and he looked very technical with those trip takedowns as well. But he's going up against an Olympic freestyle wrestler here, which is a whole different ball game. So I don't think he will be able to land any takedowns himself on Bhullar. And the big key question is, will Bhullar be able to land takedowns on Adams? And I think he's going to want to do it from the first bell, because obviously we know that heavyweight's slow. Adams was slowing down, although he got that third round finish in his last fight. He was slowing down into the second round and into the third, although he was still throwing and he still had power. His shots were coming out noticeably slower. Bhullar will have to be careful of the leg kicks as well, because he was literally just allowing Golm to land leg kicks over and over again, and he did eat them pretty well, and he didn't really seem to phase him too much. But he won't want to just stand there and constantly accept the leg kicks, because they set up other strikes as well with the feints. They set up strikes to the head, and he really needs to start checking those leg kicks when he goes forward as well, because we know how dangerous they can be, especially those low calf kicks. But I'm going with Adams to win this fight. I think he is the better striker. I think he may get taken down at some point in the fight, but I think he will be able to get back to his feet. Bhullar was getting hit by Golm. He wasn't showing any particularly great head movement or anything like that, or footwork to evade Golm's strikes. It was just more of a case of Golm was willing to eat 2 strikes to land 1 strike on Bhullar. So Bhullar just racked up the points in the judge's eyes. And if Adams can land one of those real bombs and rock Bhullar, I know he hasn't been finished via strikes in his career. He only has that omoplata loss to Adam Visharek. But I think if Adams can land a few heavy shots, we know he has knockout power. And as I mentioned, that De La Rocha fight, a lot of guys would have been finished a lot earlier in that fight. But I think at some point Adams will be able to, at some point before he really starts to tire as well, I do think Adams will be able to land a heavy shot on Bhullar, and that will signal the beginning of the end. So I'm going with Juan Adams to win this fight. I'm going with him to win via knockout in round 2.
Yeah, so for me, Arjan Bhullar is the epitome of an Olympic wrestler that has come into MMA and just hasn't bridged that gap yet between his Olympic wrestling and his MMA wrestling. And the two great examples that I'll use is Yoel Romero, he was the same, and the latest one, Henry Cejudo. And actually, when we broke that last fight down, John, with Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw, I spoke about in great lengths there about how important it is to bridge that gap, and it does naturally take these Olympic wrestlers a little bit of time to do that. So at some point, I would say within the next 3 fights of Bhullar, I think we'll see that bridge of the MMA wrestling to the Olympic wrestling just completely closed, and we'll see him take that next step in his MMA career. And the reason why I think it's going to be soon, sort of within the next few fights, is because he does train over at AKA with Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, so he is going to be getting that good wrestling treatment over at AKA. So I do think it's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to be this fight. And also, the other thing about Bhullar as well is I think that he should genuinely consider, and I don't say this a lot because I'm more of the other way around, but I think he should really be considering light heavyweight. He's 6'1", he's 240 pounds, so that's 240 pounds without sort of looking, I'm not saying he's on a bad diet, but without really keeping a good eye on his diet, and then without a weight cut as well. I think he could be a really, really good light heavyweight. And at 240 pound, I think it's doable. I just feel that his frame is very small for a heavyweight, and going towards his opponent at the opposite side of the cage, for those that don't know, Juan Adams cuts heavily to make the 265 pound limit. And I'll tell you exactly how heavily, right? So we'll do a little bit of maths here, John. I'm not a maths person, so I'll bring you in on this. So Juan Adams roughly walks around probably a little bit heavier than 300 pound, okay? He steps into the cage after his weight cut anywhere between 290 and 285 pounds. So let's just say it's 290, right? Because we'll not deal with the 5. So Arjan Bhullar weighs in at 240, hypothetically. He's probably not going to put that much weight on between when he weighs in and when he steps in the cage, because he's already 25 pound under the limit.
Yeah.
Juan Adams steps into the cage at 290. So what is the difference in weight whilst they're in the cage?
That would be, if my maths is correct, 50 pounds.
50 pounds is fucking ridiculous. And then that's not to mention the 4 inch of height and the X amount of inch reach. Juan Adams is a monster. Now, the other thing that I actually learnt about Juan Adams when I was looking into this fight is he's actually a D1 wrestler himself. He's trained with D1 wrestlers all his life. He's trained with Olympic wrestlers. He brings in wrestlers to his camp, and he has done specifically for this camp as well because of Bhullar's wrestling credentials. The dude is very savvy with his wrestling, and to the point where when he was wrestling against De La Rocha, and when he was wrestling against Teed in his Dana White Contender Series fight, he was doing some really clever stuff with his grappling, sort of holding onto the ankles, wide rolling, and just making sure that he's constantly gaining a solid, heavy top control. And when they're sort of trying to get out of position and trying to hip escape and things like that, he's very aware of what's going on. I think it's just the fact that he's so big and so powerful that this side of his game isn't really getting noticed, but man, it's definitely there. And I just feel that with his wrestling background, I don't think Bhullar is actually going to be able to take him down. I think he might get in on the hips. I think he'll get close. I think he'll try and get him down. But, man, the 50 pounds, the height, the reach, the wrestling background, D1 wrestling background of Juan Adams himself, honestly, I'm struggling to see Bhullar being able to manhandle him and drag him to the mat. Now, with what you've said, John, I actually think that Juan Adams can take Bhullar down because of everything that I've just mentioned. His height, his strength. It ain't going to be a double, and it ain't going to be a single. It's going to be a body lock and a trip, and then he's just going to fall on him. And at that point, I don't think Bhullar's going to be able to get back up off his back. I actually think that if Juan Adams takes him down once and he's got a couple of minutes to work, I think that's going to be a wrap. I think think the ground and pound is just going to be landed on Bhullar, and I almost imagine Bhullar on his back as that type of wrestler that's just a little bit like a turtle, that they're just trying to they're not really sure what to do in regards to dealing with that top pressure, and they're trying to get back up, but they keep getting nullified, and then they start to get tired because they're overworking, and then the panic comes in once they start to get hit. And I just feel that all of these stages are going to happen. Now, the one concern I have about Juan Adams in this fight is the cardio, because yes, he went 3 rounds, yes, he finished De La Rocha in the 3rd round, but listen, De La Rocha was in a horrific state in that 3rd round. I'm a little surprised this corner let him come back out for that 3rd round, but so the cardio of Juan Adams, because Juan Adams slowed even though he was in control, which is always a concern. I once had Damian Brown, ex-UFC vet, current rising phenom over in Japan. So I had Damian Brown on the podcast last year at some point, and he said to me, as a fighter that's winning a fight, you don't gas. Like, the momentum's with you. You're not supposed to gas in those scenarios. So with Juan Adams gassing at that point, I'm then thinking, right, okay, what's his cardio like? Because if Bhullar can take him into deep waters without getting finished, then that's a big concern. So again, I did a little bit of research, watched some interviews, things like that, and actually, this is something that Juan Adams has been working on for this fight. So they have made him come in to camp a little bit lighter. So obviously that's going to reserve a little bit of energy. That's going to help his cardio because the weight cut's not so extreme. They've been working a lot with the strength and conditioning coach, which actually, if you go back and look at the Adam Milstead and Mike Rodriguez breakdown that I did at the time, Mike Rodriguez had done a lot of that. He went in against Devin Clark and his cardio sort of didn't hold up and he didn't feel that great inside there, worked with a strength and conditioning coach and came back a completely different fighter. So that sort of thing does work and does help fighters. So Juan Adams has been working a lot with strength and conditioning coaches, and then also he's just been keeping a closer eye on his diet, and just not eating as freely as what he was before. So to me, he's done 3 things there that are absolutely going to benefit him inside the cage and going if it does go 3 rounds or does go the distance, I think he's going to be fine. I personally think it's not going to get out around 1. I think Bhullar might actually engage in the wrestling when he's getting hit from range with some heavy strikes from Juan Adams. I think it'll urge him to shoot in for a takedown, but I think it's going to be like a brick wall for him. I think at that point, once he closes the distance, Juan Adams will actually reverse him on the cage, get the body lock, get the trip, get him down to the mat, really suffocate him, and I think he's going to finish him in round 1. So I've got Juan Adams to win, and I'm going to take him to win via knockout. Now, we'd normally jump into the parlay piece segment of the podcast, but for this event, I honestly couldn't recommend any parlays on the card. Sometimes this happens, and we don't want to give the listeners bad advice. So for times that this does occur, so i.e. this podcast, we will replace the parlay piece segment and we'll give another segment called the prop. So the prop bets are overs, unders, wins by TKO, wins by submission, wins in the distance. That it's those sort of bets. So the prop bet of UFC Ottawa is in the Cub Swanson and Shane Burgos fight. Now, before I actually move into what the prop is and why I think it's going to be a good play for the card, I just want to break the fight down to start with because it's a really interesting fight. So I'll start with Cub Swanson. We all know what Cub Swanson is about. He's been in the game long enough, 35 years old. He's got 35 fights to his name. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, losing to Moicano, Frankie Edgar, Brian Ortega. So you could make the argument right now that Cub Swanson is on a bit of a decline. And I think you'd be right in that argument, especially from his last fight. He got dropped he was getting hurt by Moicano, then he got dropped by a jab. Then, Moicano jumped all over him and ended up grabbing a submission, a rear naked choke and tapping him out. And that's really where Swanson's weakness has been in his career. He's got 10 losses and 7 have come by submission. So, that's definitely a deficiency defensively in his game. He has only been stopped once by via knockout. That was a while ago. So he is a tough fighter, and we saw that in the Doo Ho Choi fight. It was an absolute war. I think it won Fight of the Year. Just absolutely destroying each other, but Swanson just really putting more on Duo Choi than the other way around. And at this point, the Korean Superboy was like a -200 favourite. He was hyped up to shit, and Swanson went in there and absolutely took him apart, and deservedly fight of the year, deservedly fight of the night, deservedly won the fight. Now, across the other side of the cage to him, there's Shane Burgos. Now, Burgos is a fighter that I am a big fan of. I like his striking game. He's always calm, he's composed, and he's got sneaky submissions as well. We saw that in his last fight against Kurt Holobar. He got the armbar to win in round 1. And his overall game I like a lot. But I feel that in this fight, it should be lined a lot closer. Like, I think Burgos is some sort of -170, and the comeback on Cub Swanson is like +140, +150. So I feel that the fight, I feel like it's lined very off, and it also opened very off because Burgos opened as the underdog, which again I disagree with. But it's almost one of those fights where I couldn't recommend a play on Burgos because his line's too wide. But in the same respect, I really can't advocate any sort of bet on Cub Swanson right now either, because of, like I say, I think he is declining. He's definitely closer to the end of his career than he is to the beginning of it, whereas Burgos at 28, 11-1 is completely the other way around, and he is looking like a really good fighter, a really sharp striker as well. But this leads me into the prop, because I think on the money line on both of them, like I've mentioned, I can't advocate a bet on either side right now. But the prop bet is plus money. It's currently plus 100. So it's evens money, and it's the fight not to go the distance. And the reason why I think this is a good prop for the card is because with Cub Swanson, like I've already mentioned, he is on a bit of a decline. He did just get dropped by a jab from Moicano, which is always extremely worrying when you're seeing a fighter get dropped by a jab. You know, it didn't really have too much power behind it. Didn't really look like it was particularly on like any sort of button to put a fighter out. But you know, Cub Swanson was coming forward, he was trying to be aggressive, and he got hit by a jab, put down, and then submitted. And that's the other thing, he's, like I've already mentioned, he's got a deficiency to submission, so he's been submitted 7 times out of 10, as I've already mentioned. And as for Shane Burgos, like nearly half of his wins have come by submission, even though he's got hard, sharp hands. So from that perspective, I absolutely think that Shane Burgos can put Cub Swanson down, whether that be in a brawl or whether that be in a technical fight. You know, if they are just being a little bit patient and moving in and out of range and just trading strikes, I just think that the sharper, more accurate punches are going to be coming from Burgos, and I definitely think that one of the punches can put Cub Swanson down, and from there Burgos has got a choice. He could either, you know, wrap up a neck, or he could just land the ground and pound and finish via TKO. So there's a couple of ways Burgos could finish. But let's not sit here and pretend that Shane Burgos wasn't absolutely hurt against Kurt Holobar to the point where I thought he was out. And kudos to him for grabbing that armbar whilst on bottom, also whilst hurt, and finishing Kurt Holobar. And then the fight before that, let's also not pretend that he wasn't finished by Calvin Kattar. Now, Kattar's a good fighter, but the fact of the matter is, I don't think Burgos has got a solid chin. And I think his last 2 fights have proven that. He got bombed on once by Holobar, dropped, hurt badly. And then the Calvin Kattar fight, Calvin Kattar was very tired in round 3 and still managed to get that TKO win. So I'm absolutely not confident that Burgos can't be finished in this fight. Now, the argument is, you know, Cub Swanson hasn't got a TKO finish for a very long time. I think the last one came in 2013, so it was many years ago. But like I've always said, he's aggressive. They've got 4-ounce gloves. And Cub Swanson does like to scrap. He tried to scrap against Moicano, but Moicano is just such a technical striker, defensively, offensively, that Swanson really struggled to get any sort of fire in his striking. Frankie Edgar, he had to be very careful because of the wrestling prowess. And, you know, the last time those two fought, Frankie Edgar put a wrestling clinic on him. So I do believe that was in the back of his mind. Brian Ortega is an absolute submission freak, so again, that was his deficiency. He will have had that in his mind. So I feel that his last 3 fights, he has struggled to really express himself in the cage, let's say, and really, really put on a clinic. And I think in this fight we could see him go back to that, because Shane Burgos will absolutely accept a firefight. If Cub Swanson comes forward, and listen, like I've already mentioned, he is towards the end of his career, and it would be quite smart for a fighter like Cub Swanson in this position to be looking towards that 50k bonus, because there might not be many more opportunities going forward. And I can absolutely see Cub Swanson coming forward and trying to put on a firefight, a good fight for the fans, potentially send him and Shane Burgos home with 50k each, and Burgos will accept that fight. He'll accept that firefight. And I think if the fight goes down the way I see it going down, it's going to be flip a coin, man, because if Cub Swanson is landing those punches on Burgos that he was landing on Doo Ho Choi, I don't think Burgos stays on his feet. But I'm telling you, Burgos hits hard, accurate, and sharp himself. I think he could equally put Cub Swanson down as easily. So I think that's how the fight's going to go down. I think it's going to be a barn burner. I think it's going to be a potential fight of the night. I think they're going to trade till one man drops. I do think one man drops, and that's why I think at plus money, if a fight doesn't go the distance, you've got both sides. You've also got, the potential DQ or no contest, and it's very unlikely we're going to see that happening, but that's what that prop bet gives you. So the prop bet for me is fight not to go the distance at plus money. John, what's your thoughts?
I'm completely in agreement with you. I think this has got all the potential to be fireworks and fight of the night. And I'm not going to add much more to what you said, because you pretty much covered it off perfectly. But yeah, Cub Swanson, especially that last fight of his against Moicano, that's where the real worry lies. Because obviously we saw prior to that he's lost mainly via submission to very dangerous guys: Brian Ortega, Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, Ricardo Lamas, those kind of guys. And you're going all the way back to the Jose Aldo loss in 8 seconds in 2009 for his the last actual TKO loss or knockout loss on his record. But the fact that Moicano was lighting him up and then dropped him with, it wasn't, like you say, it wasn't even a real stinging jab right on the point of the jaw or anything like that. It was just seemed like a regulation jab, and yeah, it dropped Swanson. And Burgos he's a very good boxer. He's got very crisp hands. He's got really good boxing. I'm a real big fan of Burgos, but as you said, he's a guy that can also be hit, and we've seen that in his last 2 fights against Calvin Kattar and Kurt Hollabaugh. He was hurt in that Hollabaugh fight before coming back and wrapping up the arm. And as you say, yeah, Kattar put him away in round 3, despite the fact that he was tiring himself. But I think with Burgos, he's got very good head movement, and he moves ahead very well. He has got a very boxing orientated style, so he'll be very heavy on that lead leg. So his lead leg can get chewed up a bit, and he will try to use his jab and then his head movement. But when he can't time the strikes coming at him, and he can't quite time that head movement, he has the tendency to get really cracked by people, and that is what we saw in the last couple of fights. And yeah, I'm with you on this fight. I think they'll both be happy to brawl if it comes to a brawl, and if they both brawl, I think one of them's going to drop, because Swanson looks like his chin could be on the decline after those wars, like you said, the Doo Ho Choi fight and things like that. I think his chin could be on the decline, and Burgos hits hard, so he can land on him and put him away. But equally, if Burgos he's trying to land bombs and Swanson can counter, like you said, although he hasn't put many guys away recently, Burgos doesn't seem to have the best chin either. So we just never know what we're going to see in this sport. But I really think it's a good bet that this fight is not going to go the distance, because I do think they are going to stand and bang. I think they are going to trade. And I do think one of them is going to drop. I think it will be Cub Swanson that will be dropping. I think Shane Burgos will land on him with his boxing and will put him down and get a finish. So I am picking Shane Burgos to win this fight. But yeah, I definitely can't see this fight going the distance.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add as well, just before we move on to the next segment, that my pick is also Shane Burgos to win via knockout. I missed that off of after all that breakdown, but yeah, I agree with you.
Teasing us.
Yeah, exactly, man. And I agree with you. I think one man will drop, and I think that man will be Cub Swanson. So yeah, I've got Burgos to win via TKO as well. Now it's time for the dog fight, and we believe the best underdog on the card is in the main event of the evening. We've not missed off the main event, folks. We've got Iaquinta versus Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and for those that already do know the betting lines, you'll know exactly which fight we're going with here, and it's Cowboy Cerrone. He is an underdog just now. A little bit of money's come on him over the last 24, 48 hours, so he was sitting sort of plus 130, plus 125, but now he's a lot lower, sort of plus 105, plus 110. So he is still an underdog. It is still plus money. And I do think that it is the best underdog on the card. And we've seen a completely new Cowboy. Now, there was once upon a time, it was after the Robbie Lawler fight. I bet Darren Till against Cowboy. I expected even though I bet Darren Till, I did expect a much closer fight than what we got. And then after the Darren Till fight, I also bet Yancy Medeiros against Cowboy. And at that point, I was saying, Cowboy's on his decline. He is getting old. He's had a shit ton of fights. And then, he goes and has a kid, man. Suddenly his life is, and his fighting life, he's just completely done a 180 flip, man, and he's on a resurgence, and it's awesome to see, because I don't think there's a mixed martial arts fan on the planet that doesn't like Cowboy Cerrone, and especially if you didn't think that his comeback, his resurgence was happening after the Mike Perry fight, then after the Alexander Hernandez fight, you definitely know that resurgence is here, because that was a fight that I think pretty much 90% of MMA fans were picking Alexander Hernandez in that fight. The young, hungry, aggressive kid who was talking the talk, was walking the walk. The hype was there. His belief, his confidence was there. Everything about that kid was great. Until he stepped in the cage with Donald Cerrone, who gave him that vet lesson. And listen, actually one of my concerns in this fight is that Donald Cerrone is dropping back down to lightweight. Obviously, he dropped back down to lightweight for the Hernandez fight as well, but he had a really tough cut. And even during the build-up to that Hernandez fight, he was looking horrible. He didn't really want to talk, and he was moody, and the dude just didn't like cutting the weight. But he made the weight. He looked fine inside the cage. How he may look over 5 rounds, I'm not too sure. But he is a vet. He's a pro. He's done it before. And, I don't think he'll be going down to lightweight and cutting the weight at 155 if he didn't believe that his body could take it. So I trust the process. I think Cowboy will look okay at 155. He did in his last fight. That was his first cut down to 155 in a while, so now he's felt that it should be a little bit easier this time. And like I say, man, I don't even know how to break Cowboy down, because it's almost like I'm teaching people to suck eggs. We know exactly what Cowboy brings to the table. He's got a good Muay Thai kickboxing style. He's got good kicks. He's got solid knees. He's got combinations. His grappling is extremely underrated, top side and bottom side as well. And this is actually something from Iaquinta's point of view that I don't worry about so much, because if he does take Cowboy down, which I am hearing some people predict, which I think is absolutely possible, by the way, I think we will see a couple of takedowns. I trust Cowboy on his back. Completely trust him on his back. Mike Perry took Cowboy down, and I know there's a bit of a difference between Mike Perry's grappling and Iaquinta's grappling. I'm not going to sit and pretend that there's not, but he's got sweeps, he's got reversals, he's got submissions off his bottom, arm bars, triangles. He's got those actual submission finishes on his record as well. It's not as if he just throws them up like I mentioned with Thomas Gifford last week against Roosevelt Roberts. Cowboys finishes these submissions, and like I say, I don't worry so much if Iaquinta takes him down. And Cowboys tends to have most of his problems come against southpaws, where Iaquinta isn't. He's an orthodox fighter, so I think Cowboy's going to be able to use low kicks. I think he's going to be able to, again, I've already used this phrase in this podcast once already, just express himself in the cage and just let himself go a little bit, because I think he's going to be fine against Iaquinta as long as he's not taking a shit ton of body shots. And I think that's where Cowboy's actually weakest right now. He's on his body. If you do start to really land on his body and accumulate those strikes to the ribs and to the stomach, I think eventually that's how you crumble Cowboy. So he's just got to be a little bit careful of that. But I think if the fight goes 5 rounds, I think if it goes the distance, I think the latter rounds could get a little bit hairy for Cowboy. But I think the early rounds he's going to be able to get his kicks off, get his strikes off. He's the taller fighter, so he'll be able to land those head kicks. He could potentially force a takedown, and then from those takedowns, he could then, like I've already mentioned, be a massive threat from bottom. But don't be surprised to see Cowboy try and take him down either, because he's got a really good top game, just as good as his ground game is on bottom. So I just think that, again, stylistically, I think it favours Cowboy. We've seen in the past that Iaquinta has issues against kickers. We saw that against in the Masvidal fight a couple of years ago, and man, that was a robbery as well, by the way. That how Iaquinta came out with that win, I've got absolutely no idea. But that's the reason why I'm going to say he got beat, because I believe it, and everybody else believes that he did. But Masvidal caused a lot of problems in that fight with kicks, and it just feels to me that Iaquinta, he has to get his range right in this fight, and he has to do it for 25 minutes. And what I mean by getting the range right is he can't be so far out that he's getting kicked at, because he'll just get kicked at, pieced apart for however long the fight goes. But if he gets in too close, I think Cowboy's better in the clinch. I think he will wrap up a plum clinch. I think he will land elbows. He will land knees. He could potentially then start to look for a trip to get on top, or he could entice Al to take him down. And like I say, he can work submissions off his back. But Iaquinta needs to get smack in the middle of staying on the outside and coming in too far on the inside, so he has to stay at boxing range, and it's imperative that he stays at this boxing range, because I think just a little outside or just a little inside, so a little too far or a little too further away, I think he's in danger. He's got to stay in that perfect range for the entirety of the fight, until or unless Cowboy does start to gas, then he can be a little bit more free in his range and his movement and stuff like that. But he's got to get that right, and if he doesn't, I think he's going to lose the fight. Ultimately, I do think he is going to lose this fight. I do think the fight hits the mat at some point, and I don't know whether Cowboy's going to finish it off his back or on top, but I've just got a funny feeling the fight is going to hit the mat, and I'm not saying it's going to be the first time it hits the mat, but at some point, maybe later in the fight, I think Cowboy's going to wrap up a submission, whether that's, like I said, whether that's being him offensive or him being defensive. I think he can do either. And yeah, I think the fight's going to end in submission. I think Cowboy's going to get the win. If he doesn't get the submission, then I think he can win more of the early rounds, maybe steal one of the later rounds and win a decision. But ultimately, I think Donald Cowboy Cerrone is going to win. I'm going to take him to win via submission. John, who have you got?
Yeah, this is this fight. I think you mentioned it last week. We're now with the new format. We have to talk about the fights a little bit beforehand, and where our picks are going to go, and what we're going to break down in each section. And initially, when you asked me my thoughts on this, my pick was Iaquinta, and I thought that he would have the upper hand because of his boxing. Cerrone has struggled previously against really good boxers, and obviously Iaquinta's got some very good wrestling. He's got good cardio. We saw him durable against Khabib and go the distance. He's pretty hard to finish. He's only been finished a couple of times, 2 or 3 times in his career. So my initial aim was to Iaquinta, but then I started to do some tape and look into it a bit more, and of course, as you know, I came back to you and said, hold on a minute, I think Dad Cerrone, he's actually going to win this fight, and I agree with a lot of things that you say. I think the kicks of Cerrone are going to be really important in this fight, because he has got very nice kicks, mixes in the body kicks really well, the leg kicks, and he has those long legs which he'll be able to keep Iaquinta out of range with those kicks. When Iaquinta comes in, if he just uses that teep straight at the middle, and then angles off and starts firing off the kicks, I think, like you say, he can rack up a lot of points in the judges' eyes, and Iaquinta will get frustrated, because although we've seen Iaquinta against Kevin Lee, he threw in a mix in a few leg kicks. He's not really got a very kickboxing heavy style. He's just more a pure boxer and wrestler. Do I think the fight will go to the mat? Yes, as you said, Platinum Mike Perry took Cerrone down from the clinch in Cerrone's last fight, but we saw how quickly Cerrone reversed position and then locked in a submission. Iaquinta has got some good wrestling. He's got a good takedown defense, but you do, once you are starting to get hit by shots, especially heavy kicks to the body and things like that, your timing's all off on your takedown defense as well, and Cerrone has got some good offensive wrestling, and I do think this is going to be a really close fight, but for where we're picking it in the underdog section, I think Cerrone does stand the best chance of any underdog on this card because of how he can win this fight. The one major red flag is, of course, what you mentioned, is the cut back down to lightweight, and it'll be interesting to see how Cerrone fares there, because he has struggled with the weight cut. He doesn't like the weight cut. He does struggle when he gets hit to the body. We've seen him finish several times at lightweight because of body strikes, and it'll be interesting to see how Iaquinta approaches that, because he was ripping the body in the fight against Kevin Lee, and if he goes to Cerrone's body in this fight, it'll be interesting to see whether that cut down to lightweight has any effect, and whether it will have any lasting damage. I do, as you said as well, think Cerrone will fade later on in the fight. He did slow down in some of the 5-round fights at welterweight, and that's without the cut, the big cut. Obviously, we saw that mainly in the Leon Edwards fight. But ultimately, yeah, I do think that Cerrone can win this fight, and I do think it's going to be through utilising his kicks, and either just utilising his kicks to rack up the points in the judges' eyes early on, or whether it be those kicks putting off Iaquinta's timing and landing a takedown, and even off his back, Cerrone has really good submission. So if Iaquinta decides to use his offensive wrestling, don't be surprised if Cerrone's immediately thrown at the triangle, thrown at the armbar, looking to sweep and reverse position. We have seen Iaquinta lose via submission several times before. He's lost to Mitch Clark back at UFC 173, was via Darce choke. He's lost against Michael Chiesa, was via rear naked choke. I know you're going back several years for these losses, but they still happen. We can't take those off his record. And Donald Cerrone is one of the most dangerous guys with his offensive submissions. So I think Cerrone is going to win this fight, and I also think he stands a good chance of locking on the submission to Iaquinta. I do think it's going to be off his back as well. I think he's going to lock on an armbar, or he's going to lock on a triangle when Iaquinta actually takes him down, or if Cerrone sweeps and then gets in top position and can lock on something. But yeah, I'm going with Donald Cerrone to win this fight. I think he's going to win via submission. I think it's going to be in round 3.
Interesting. Now, with the breakdowns complete, we now enter the quick fire round. And first up in the quick fire round is Walt Harris versus the newcomer Sergey Spivak. John, who have you got?
Yeah, this fight is it's tough to call really, because Spivak, of course, he's coming into the fight as a newcomer to the UFC. He's currently undefeated in his professional career. I think he's 9-0 currently. He's been fighting for WWFC for the vast majority of his previous fights. So I always mention these promotions that guys are coming from, whether we know the level of competition he's facing is good or not, and what sort of guys he's taking on. But it's interesting to see when you look through his record. His last fight he won via first round neck crank against a guy called Tony Lopez. Tony Lopez is 61-28 according to his Tapology record. And then if you go a couple of fights before that, you've got the famous Travis Fulton, who according to Tapology, he's 255, 52-10, which is just insane.
Well, I've got here 255 for 54 for 10 for 1.
Okay, so even more fights under his record.
Who knows?
But, who knows? But any guy that's got over 300 fights in his career, you know, he's experienced.
Nuts, that, when I found that out the other day, oh man, I was laughing. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, from the limited footage that I've seen of Spivak, I haven't seen a great deal of him. He looks okay. He's got power. I mean, a lot of his all of his finishes have come via stoppage in the first round, but I haven't really been massively impressed with him. Walt Harris comes into the fight off the back of a split decision win over Andrei Arlovsky, and he beat Daniel Spitz in the fight before that. Again, I wasn't overly impressed with him in those fights. The Arlovsky fight was a real close split decision. The Spitz fight, he looked sloppy in the first round, and eventually did land on Spitz a heavy shot that put him away. We do know that Walt Harris does possess strong knockout power, but it's just him setting up those big knockout strikes, and I just don't think he's really honed those skills yet. But I'm going with Walt Harris to win this fight. I'm going with the guy who's got UFC experience. I haven't seen enough of Spivak to be able to call it for him to win. Walt Harris looks like he's pretty durable defensively with strikes. I mean, he has been finished a few times in his career, but I do think Walt Harris is going to win this fight. I think it's going to be I think it's going to go to a decision as well. I don't think Walt Harris puts out that much output, so I'm going with Walt Harris to win via a pretty tame decision. I think it's going to be.
Yeah, Spivak's strange, like we've already mentioned in regards to his previous opponents, but in regards to his style, he looks like he's got sort of a Muay Thai based style. He tends to get his opponents hurt and then just spams elbows against the cage, and actually his killer instinct for a heavyweight isn't that great, which is quite alarming because you should be able to kill anybody at heavyweight with how big you are. But the other side to this is, although I've not been totally impressed in regards to seeing him inside the cage, he's 24 years old, he's 9-0, he hasn't fought for 8 months. So all those three things together to me scream development, and we see it time and time again with these young unbeaten fighters that haven't fought in such a long time. 8 months isn't exactly such a long time, but haven't fought in a significant amount of time, and then they come back and they just look totally like a totally different fighter. And there is that danger with Spivak in this fight, that he does come into this fight looking much better than the last time we saw him. However, this is an educated guess, it's an assumption, so it's stuff that I can't pick Spivak to win based on me guessing that he may be developed. Because of that reason, I'm going for Walt Harris. I think Walt Harris is a veteran. You know, his record isn't great at 11-7. He is 35 years old, but like I said, like you've already mentioned, he's been in there with some decent guys, Andrei Arlovsky, Fabricio Verdum. He's got the veteran experience. He has also got a shit ton of power as well. All of his wins have come by knockout, and I think that's what happens again. I think he's going to knock Sergey Spivak out. So I've got Walt Harris to win, and I'm going to take him to win via knockout. Now, in your next fight, we've got another newcomer. We've got Marc-André Barriault versus Andrew Sanchez. John, who have you got?
Yeah, Barriault. I'm going to call him his nickname Power Bar. He looks an interesting guy coming into the UFC. He's coming into the fight as a double champion under the TKO banner, middleweight and light heavyweight. He's physically strong. He hits hard. He's got good combinations. He has got power in both hands. So it'd be interesting to see how he fares in his UFC debut against a guy named Andrew Sanchez who's really hard to judge. I mean, he tends to fade very badly. We saw that in the Ryan James fight. We saw that against Anthony Smith. But when he's on it and his cardio's good and he's working his wrestling, he's a national wrestling champion. He can dominate fights, and we saw that against Marcus Perez. His conditioning was a lot better, and he came out there and landed takedowns. We saw against Khalil Roundtree, landed over and over again. Trevor Smith, and so it's really hard to judge his fights. If Powerbar can land something on Sanchez and Sanchez can't get the takedown early on, round 1, round 2, I think he'll tire and I think Powerbar will win late on. But for what we saw in Andrew Sanchez last fight, his conditioning and his stamina looked a lot better. He didn't seem to gas as much. He seemed to be a lot more reserved and I don't want to say cautious in his approach, but just more measured. And for that reason, I'm going with Andrew Sanchez to win this fight. I think he will be able to take the newcomer down. He has got heavy top control. I don't think he's going to gas as bad as we've seen before if his last fight's anything to go by. So for that reason, I think Andrew Sanchez is going to win via decision.
Yeah, I'm going the other way for this one. I'm going with the newcomer, Barriault now. There's obviously red flags between each side here. So obviously you've got the newcomer, the octagon jitters, the level of competition, all those sort of things that come with a UFC debut. And then obviously on Andrew Sanchez's side, you've got this gas tank, this cardio issue that, like you've already mentioned, Johnny did seem to fix during his last fight, but it doesn't take away what we've seen on the previous fights before that. And it's one of these things where I think that the questions on Sanchez's cardio is really going to be answered after this fight, because he is going to be pressured. He is going to be against a guy that's likely to be a lot bigger than him as well. He was the TKO light heavyweight and middleweight champion as well. So the fact that he has been fighting at 205 does make me believe that he is going to be bigger than Andrew Sanchez. Obviously, we'll see more at the weigh-ins. So the questions on Sanchez's cardio is definitely going to be answered, but it's going to be after this fight. So if I see it a second time in a row that his cardio is lasted, held up, and he's been put under pressure and been made to work as well, then I'll buy into the fact that he's corrected his issues. But until I see that this second time, I can't be that confident. Like you've already mentioned about Powerbar John, he's got solid hands, power in his left, power in his right. He has got pressure that does leave him to be aggressive and leave him open to be taken down. So again, this is a concern for him. But I think I'm going with the newcomer in this fight. I do think that Sanchez has problems against hard-hitting dudes that come forward aggressively and can stay in the fight late as well, which is Barriault. So I'm taking Marc-André Barriault to win. I'm going to take him to win via knockout. Now in the next fight, we've got Macy Chiasson versus Sarah Moras. John, who have you got?
I'm going to keep this one pretty short and sweet. I'm going with Macy Chiasson to win this fight. I mean, she's a female at bantamweight who's got legitimate stopping power. We've seen that in pretty much all of her fights on the Ultimate Fighter season. Back when she was fighting in her pro debut, her last couple of fights, and that Gina Mazzani fight, she just blitzed her within 2 minutes of the first round. She was landing very heavy body kicks over and over again, and then when she got that clinch, and they broke, she landed a heavy shot that led to Mazzani just crumbling, and yeah, I just think she'll be able to. She's so tall and long for this weight. I just think she'll be able to utilise that front kick, the body kicks. She'll be able to keep Moras at distance, and I just don't think Moras will be able to get hold of her. And her best weapon is her submissions. She's got submission wins on her record, but I just don't think she'll be able to get the fight to a position where she'll be able to submit Chiasson. I think that she'll just keep it at range, beat her up, and then if they do clinch, I think she's stronger of the two in the clinch, and she'll hit her with elbows, knees, catch her on the break coming out, and I think she's actually going to put her away again. So I'm going with Macy Chiasson to win this fight via stoppage in round 2.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. I think Chiasson's going to get the win also, and like I said, like you've already mentioned, I'm the same. I'm going to keep it short and simple because she's looking like a good fighter inside the cage, and she's looking like she's got a style that can nullify her opponents. So she's very strong. She's very tall. She's controlled in the clinch. She can land some hard strikes inside the clinch, and I think she's going to be able to. To really get her own way with Sarah Moras. Now, I'm not sure if she finishes her, and the reason I say that is because I do think Moras is tough, and I do think she's defensively sound on the feet and on the mat as well. So I've got a funny feeling it's just going to be one of those ugly grinding decisions that leads to Macy Chiasson taking a win on the judges' scorecard. So yeah, I've got Chiasson to win. I'm going to take it to win via decision. Now in the next fight, we've got Aiemann Zahabi versus Vince Morales. John, who have you got?
Yeah, I like the looks of Zahabi. Obviously, we saw him fight in his UFC debut against Reginaldo Vieira, and he won a decision. And then we saw him go up against Ricardo Ramos back at UFC 217. That was a really fun fight, lots of back and forth, lots of scrambles. Zahabi taking him down and him scrambling. And then we saw him get brutally knocked out with that spinning back elbow, which Ramos had flirted with a couple of times in the fight and eventually landed in round 3. And I'm actually glad that Zahabi's taken 18 months or so out since that knockout, because that was brutal, and he was out cold for a long time after that connected as well. So, but now we've seen Ramos fight since. I'm not sure where we can really put Zahabi now, because obviously that fight against Said Nurmagomedov, Ramos didn't look particularly good at all, and then obviously he won the fight before that against Kyung Ho Kang by a split decision, and we all thought he was a real beast, but he doesn't seem to be as good as I think we think he is, and now that makes me question where Zahabi's level is. I'd say that I do think he's going to win this fight. I think he'll utilise his wrestling and his grappling over Morales. Morales was taken down in his last fight against Song Yadong a couple of times. Now Song Yadong is a pretty fun and good fighter. But yeah, he managed to take Morales down. I think Zahabi will be able to do the same. And I think that's the key to victory for Zahabi. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Morales did win this fight, because, like I say, we don't really know what kind of level Zahabi's at now. We've seen a bit more of Ramos, but yeah, I'm going to go with Zahabi to win this fight. I think he's going to win a decision.
For a second there, I thought you were about to diss my boy Song Yadong.
No.
I would have kicked off. No, I'm joking. But yeah, Aiemann Zahabi, Vince Morales. This is actually a good fight. It's going to be a fun fight. They're both predominantly strikers. I agree with you. I think that Zahabi's taken the correct decision to take 18 months off since the knockout from Ricardo Ramos. But I also think that it's not just because of the damage that he's took that time off. Zahabi came into the UFC with a lot of hype behind him, because obviously his brother is the owner of TriStar. So he came in with a lot of hype, and I don't think he quite lived up to what we're all expecting. So I think within these 18 months, they at TriStar, they're going to have fine-tuned a lot of things and really sharpened his tools up across all disciplines. You know, his wrestling, his striking, his jiu-jitsu. I think they've spent a lot of time on Zahabi in 18 months. This is, again, just me making assumptions and making educated guesses. But even though Vince Morales does come forward, he is aggressive, he likes to strike, I think Zahabi's the more accurate striker. I think he's the quicker mover. I think he's got the better movement. And I just think Zahabi's going to be able to pick it in for 3 rounds if need be. And like you said, John, I do think that he's got a slightly underrated wrestling game that, like I've mentioned, is likely to be sharpened and fine-tuned a little bit. So I think he's going to have a good plan B for taking Morales down if it does, or if it doesn't go the way that he hopes it goes on the feet. So I think Aiemann Zahabi's got a few ways to win in this fight, but I really want to see more of Zahabi before I can really start being confident in him. But for the sake of the podcast, I'm going to take Aiemann Zahabi to win. I'm going to take him to win via decision. Now, in the next fight, we've got Kyle Nelson versus Matt Sayles. John, who have you got?
Yeah, again, I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet. I'm picking Matt Sayles to win this fight. I really like the look of Matt Sayles. I actually picked Matt Sayles in his last fight against Shayman Moraes, which was a very close fight. Moraes is a good fighter. We know that. He's a dangerous guy, and Sayles was really coming back into that fight in round 3 and was landing on Moraes, and it was a close fight. And yeah, for such a young guy, Sayles is so composed in there. His striking's very good. He rips the body well. He's got really, really good cardio and pressure. He can go 3 hard rounds constantly in your face. We saw that in his last fight against Moraes. Carl Nelson, obviously we saw him in his last fight in the making his UFC debut at short notice against Diego Ferreira. He lost in round 2. He had a really good first round against Verheer, but he gassed really badly in that fight. And although it's the fact that he probably came in at short notice, and that's probably why he gassed so badly. I just think that Sayles is going to be able to put a pace on Nelson and wear him down and tire him again. Like I say, Sayles can go hard for 3 rounds. He's got really good power. We saw that in Dana White's Contender Series. He's got that right hand of his. He's loaded and ready to go all the time. He's got finishes in the later rounds earlier on in his professional career. So yeah, I think he's going to wear down Carl Nelson with his strikes, rips it to the body well, take the gas away from him, and then midway through the second, third round, I think he's going to put the fight away. So I'm going with Matt Sayles to win this fight via knockout in round 2.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Kyle Nelson back as well. You know, like you've already mentioned, he looked really good in the opening.
Yeah, fun fighter as well, man.
Yeah, absolutely. That opening couple of minutes from him in that Carlos Diego Ferreira fight was absolutely solid, and Diego Ferreira is no slouch at all. You know, he's a top fighter himself, but it was an adrenaline dump that got Kyle Nelson, which is a bit of a shame. So we'll see this time how he'll have learned from that, and we'll see this time how he fares. But I've got to pick Matt Sayles for this fight as well. You know, his last fight against Shayman Moraes, he looked okay in there. He had a couple of eye pokes, and you know, it did seem to knock him off his game a little bit. And he came back strong. He finished the fight strong. He's got good cardio. He's obviously part of the team alliance with Dominic Cruz as well. He's one of his proteges, so he's got good training, good people behind him. And then you look at what Shayman Moraes has done from there. You know, he went on to beat Julio Arce, who I rate very highly, and then he did lose against Sadiq Yusuff, but it was very close until that third round. And Sadiq Yusuff is a fighter that, again, I'm massively, massively high on. So to actually go out there and put the performance on that he did against Shayman Moraes, even though he lost the fight, it's still quite impressive in my eyes. Like I say, I've got to see more of Kyle Nelson to really gauge a complete understanding of his game. But from what I've seen of Matt Sayles, he's solid everywhere. He's fought better competition, and I think he's going to get the win. I think he's going to get the win via decision. So I'm going Matt Sayles to win, and I'm going to take him to win via decision. Now in the next fight, it's Mitch Gagnon versus Cole Smith, the newcomer. John, who have you got?
Yeah, this is newcomer versus veteran. We so often talk about the newcomer's nerves and how they're going to fare coming into the UFC under the bright lights, but I am picking the newcomer Cole Smith to win this fight. The reason being, Mitch Gagnon is, we just don't know where he is now, because the last time we saw him in action was back in 2016 at UFC 206. He lost that fight to Matthew Lopez. Fight before that, he fought former champion Renan Barriault back in 2014. So he's had one fight since 2014, which is a loss. And for that reason, it is mainly that reason. I just can't pick him. We don't know what kind of guy we're going to see. Is he banged up now, or has he taken that time to improve his game? We don't know. Cole Smith looks a pretty dangerous guy. He has finished fights with strikes. He can also win by decision, and he has also got 3 submission wins on his record. So he's a pretty well-rounded guy. And yeah, I just think that given the time out that Mitch Gagnon has had, I just can't look past the fact that he's only had 1 fight since 2014. Now, there's every possibility that he can lock on one of his signature chokes. He specialises in those rear naked chokes and those guillotines. Cole Smith, in his last fight, he was pressurising a lot. His fight against Tyler Wilson, he won via rear naked choke, but he does like to get the fight to the ground, pressuring with the takedowns. Can Gagnon wrap up a guillotine while he's going for the takedown? Quite possibly. But yeah, because of the timeout, I've got to pick Cole Smith to win this fight. So I'm going Cole Smith, and I do think he's going to finish him via submission in round 2.
I'm going the opposite way. I'm going to take Mitch Gagnon to win. Obviously, it is a worry, the layoff that he's had, but also the fact that Cole Smith is coming in on a UFC debut, and he's 6-0 in the level of competition. He's also questionable as well. That also presents some red flags in this fight. But the reason why I'm picking Mitch Gagnon to win, and I'm going to be very specific with how I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win via one of his guillotine chokes. He's got 6 guillotines on his record. And the tape that I was watching of Cole Smith, he does strike, but he looks to be the type of fighter that strikes to close distance, and then he'll shoot in for the double. And he'll shoot in against the cage as well, and he leaves his neck a little bit out sometimes, and I do feel that it could be a weapon that a fighter could use against him. And then you've got Gagnon, who seems to specialise in these guillotine chokes. But then the thing is, when Cole Smith takes his opponent down, he takes him down and lands in guard, and then that's the worry. So, for example, if there is a fighter that takes somebody down and lands in half guard, that's slightly less of a worry, because the guillotine choke is harder to get in half guard, and they can also quickly transition over to side control as well, which completely nullifies the guillotine. Whereas when you're landing in full guard, you're in deep shit. If someone wraps a guillotine, wraps their arm around your neck for a guillotine choke, and then wraps in full guard as well, you're then in a spot of bother. You know what I mean? So I've got Mitch Gagnon to win. I'm going to take him to win via submission. Now, in the next fight, and we've put this at the bottom because it is a short notice fight, and I'm not sure where it's going to be placed on the card, but we've got Nordine Taleb versus the newcomer coming in on short notice, Kyle Prepelec. John, who have you got?
Short notice opponent for Nordine Taleb in Kyle Prepelec. Don't really know a great deal about the guy, I'll be honest. I saw some of his clips of his last fight where he beat a former UFC guy, Cody Pfister, via unanimous decision. Nordine Taleb is another tri-star guy. He's coming into the fight off the back of two stoppage losses. Sean Strickland in his last fight, he lost by a ground and pound. Claudio Silva, the fight before, he lost by a rear naked choke. Both those fights he did look good for. I know he lost in the first round to Claudio Silva, but for the first 2 or 3 minutes he looked good. Same against Sean Strickland, he looked good in the first round, then Strickland figured him out. I think that's the worry with Nordine Taleb. I think he's too easy to figure out. He starts off well in fights, but against decent level opposition, they suss him out and they take advantage and then they take over the fights, which leads to him getting those losses. But yeah, I think with his experience, fighting at a tri-star, they'll have him well prepared, even though he's fighting a now new opponent. He utilises a nice range of kicks, those low kicks and things like that, and I think he'll just have too much experience for the newcomer, Prepelec. Obviously, he fought most recently at catchweight back in March, 160 pounds. So will he have had time to really size up and get to the sort of size that Taleb is in this fight? I don't know. So Taleb might have that slight slight size advantage, and he is a lot taller as well at 6'3". So I think Taleb's gonna win this fight, and I think he's going to utilise his experience on the way to a decision victory.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think it's a very tough fight to come in on your debut against somebody like Nordin Taleb, especially when it's short notice as well. Now, I do believe he's got better since his losses. You know, he has lost to Alessandro Ricci and Troy Lamson, but I just feel stylistically this is where the fight is going to be won and lost. It's not gonna be solely based on skills, even though I believe Nordin's the much better fighter in every area, but I just feel that Kyle Prepolek is an aggressive striker. He comes forward. He likes to throw down. And I actually think in this fight, even though Nordin is predominantly a striker, we have seen every now and again he does hunt for these opportunistic takedowns, and he's got pretty decent top control, heavy top pressure. And I actually think it's going to be one of these fights where Nordin does adopt more of a wrestling game plan, and I'm not sure if he'll know that right now, but I think he'll adjust inside the cage. So I think he'll be striking with Prepolek as well. And I'm not saying he's going to get outstruck by him at all, but I just feel that he'll start to read Prepolek and realise that actually the easiest path to victory in this fight is probably via taking him down and spending a bit of time on top control. And I think it's actually going to look a lot like the Oliver Enkamp fight when Enkamp stepped in on short notice. He was the slightly smaller fighter, not quite up to the size of Nordin. Again, it was short notice. Again, I'm not saying people are surprised that Prepolek or Enkamp's coming to the UFC, but it was one of those names that got through in there as short notice that none of us really expected. I just think Nordin's going to hand him that vet lesson. So I've got Nordin Taleb to win, and I'm going to take him to win via decision. And that's it for this week's podcast, guys. So John, before we hit the Newsome MMA mentions, what do you need to mention, man?
Just as always, just check out all the content I'm putting out there. I've been a lot busy the last few weeks. Obviously on the Newsome MMA website, I think it was yesterday, it might have even been today. These days all merge into one nowadays. But I had a really good interview with Bellator middleweight Fabian Edwards, who's obviously fighting this Saturday. He's always a fun guy to talk to, and EFC's flyweight champion Jay Cadley, again another fun guy who's not afraid to call guys out, and that's on the YouTube channel as well. So have a look for that, and there's plenty more stuff like that to come. So yeah, make sure you check that out, and as always, just hit me up on Twitter at MMA and me if you want to talk all things mixed martial arts related, because I'm always down to chat.
Absolutely, and just while we're on the topic of interviews as well, I've also got the UFC light heavyweight phenom Alexander Rakic interview dropping at some point this week as well, so keep an eye out for that. But first of all, from the Newsome MMA mentions, I just want to mention the Newsome MMA website. So don't forget to visit the website newsomemma.co.uk, where you'll find my MMA betting section, which will provide written betting advice for 3 of the fights that were in this podcast's quickfire round. You'll also find the locally famous tape index feature, prediction videos, fighter interviews, and content collaboration with Heavy Duty Fight Management too. And you can even request colour commentary and media coverage from Newsome MMA as well. The next mention is the long-term sponsor of Newsome MMA, which is CBD Life UK. CBD is an amazing product, and it's something that I use myself every day. Thousands of professional athletes also use CBD too, and at CBD Life UK, they've got a wide variety of products to suit the needs of any customer. You can go to cbdlifeuk.com and use promo code Newsome MMA to get 15% off your order. And the final mention is the newest sponsor of Newsome MMA, Golden Ticket Fight Promotions. Golden Ticket put on some fantastic MMA shows, and they're one of the biggest regional promotions in the Midlands over here in the UK. The next event is GTFP 12 at the Hangar Events venue in Wolverhampton on May the 18th. Tickets are on sale right now, and you can also follow them on all the social channels, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, to keep up to date with everything Golden Ticket. And that's it from us, guys. Enjoy the fights on Saturday night, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy.